Good afternoon and welcome to this EU Datathon webinar. My name is Simon Steuer. I'm from the Publications Office of the European Union. And we have for you EU Datathon 2022, which is your chance to win a prize of €25,000 per challenge. And today we would like to present you very interesting data from the recently created Data Office of the European Central Bank. And we're very happy to welcome Thomas Gottron. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Simon. Thanks for the nice introduction. Also, thanks a lot for giving us again the opportunity to contribute to the EU Datathon with the data that is provided and published by the ECB. Maybe as a first word also to say on this, when I'm talking about data that is published by the ECB, this means that there are many more institutions actually involved in the preparation and the dissemination of this data, because we're working closely together also with other European institutions like Eurostat, the national central banks, and other authorities and institutions that help us in compiling, quality assuring, assessing, and disseminating the data that I'm going to talk about. The webinar of today is about a peek in the ECB's data warehouse. And the main idea is to inspire you and to give you an idea of what kind of data can you expect from the ECB, and maybe with this to spark some ideas of what you can make with it in the context of the EU Datathon. And with this, I want to start straight away with the first example of what kind of data we actually provide. And what you see here is a chart that I have picked from one of the websites where our data is available, the Euro area statistics. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about the sources later on. But this example is quite nicely representative for the kind of data that we have. What you see here is a chart that is presenting the bank's interest rates and the growth rate of loans to households. So let's say two concepts that probably most of us are pretty familiar with, even if we're not working in the bank, in the central banking world. And what you can see here is that as a topic, the statistics and the data that the ECB is publishing is obviously closely related to all the things that are going on in, let's say, the economic domain or in the financial world. Another thing that you can see here is that the data is not just provided with as it is of today, but that you have also the whole history. So in this case, you can see how the bank interest rates and the growth rates of loans to households have evolved over the last 10 years. So the data comes as time series, which is an interesting aspect that you can use to put things in context. Just to give you one example, what you see here, if you're looking at the blue line that are the growth rate of the loans to households, you see that there is a small dip in the curve in the beginning of 2020, which coincides, for example, with the COVID-19 crisis. So this time dimension can be something that is quite interesting. And the last thing that you can see here as well, in this case, you see at the top that these are the statistics for the whole euro area. And this means that, of course, here the data is aggregated for all the countries that have the euro as a currency. But you can also, for many of the data sets that we have, drill down and actually take a look at a more granular level and other things. So if you're, for example, taking a look at this kind of data, you could be interested to see how does it look actually when I'm considering only France, Finland, or Spain, just to give some examples. And you see that the data looks quite different in these cases. The nice thing about the data is, in the preparation process, we are ensuring that the data is harmonized and that it is consistent and comparable. And that is all the work that is going in the preparation of this data as well. So overall, with this example, what I wanted to show you in a high level is you will find data on economic and financial activities. They typically come as time series, and you have multiple options of aggregating or drilling down in the data, for example, by country or by the type of financial instrument that you're currently investigating. That much as an introduction. And now let me give you an overview of the different data sets that the ECB is actually providing. And these, I have grouped them a bit together on the different, let's say, categories of data sets that we are having. And these are data and statistics on money, credit, and banking statistics, external statistics, sectoral statistics, surveys on enterprises and households, financial markets and interest rates, and last but not least, supervisory data and prudential statistics. And now I will give you a little deeper insight and also references for further information for all of these data sets. Let's start with the first one, the statistics on money, credit, and banking. So here, typically what you get is information that is coming from balance sheets of banks, and that is used to aggregate monetary aggregates and to provide information about these. So if you're, for example, interested in how much liquidity there is in the market. This also contains balance sheet information or stocks and flows between the participants and the entities in the financial subsectors. You get information about credit institutions, money market funds, and lots of other players in the financial markets, insurance corporations, pension funds, and so on. This, of course, is also just scratching on the surface. If you want to know more, my recommendation would really be to take a look at additional information that I'm providing you for all of these data sets. For example, you always have information on the methodology, on how this data is prepared, how it is collected, what it is based on, what it is used for. And here the ECB's website is actually a very good resource. The data itself is available via the Statistical Data Warehouse, the SDW, and I will show you later on where you can find it and how it works. And the data availability, as I said, is time series, and depending on which particular information you're looking for, you will find it with a resolution of annual, quarterly, or monthly granularity, and even with the historicity going back in time to varying starting dates. The second data set that we're having is what we refer to as external statistics. Now here you have the so-called balance of payments and the international investment positions, which summarize, let's say, the interactions between Euro area residents and non-residents, so the rest of the world. And there you get information about their transactions and their investment positions on a monthly and on a quarterly basis, and gives you an idea of the interactions, let's say, between the countries. And here, again, for the methodology, there is a guideline published by the ECB that you can find. There is also, if you really want to dig deeper into this kind of data and how it is prepared, there is a methodological manual published by the IMF, the so-called BPM, which is the Balance of Payment Manual version 6. And there you really find all the information. Data as well is, as mentioned before, available on a monthly, quarterly basis and from the SDW. It might be worth mentioning that here this information is also available from Eurostat. Is also publishing data on balance of payments, international investment positions, and also from the IMF. Data set number 3 is the so-called sectoral statistics. Now here you take a look at the residential institutions and the residential sectors that we're having in Europe. And here you have a breakdown of the economic activity between these sectors. And now when I'm mentioning sectors, what actually is behind this is a distinction between entities that are non-financial corporations, financial corporations, government, or households. And there is giving you an idea of how they interact with each other in terms of investments, transactions, and holdings, and so on. As well here, as a methodology, please have a look at the ECB website. And if you're interested, what are, for example, these kind of sectors, there is the methodological manual, the so-called ESA 2010 manual. ESA stands for European System of Accounts, where you get all these information and the breakdown of the different sectors. The data, again, available from the SDW, our statistical data warehouse. And here you have quarterly data, which actually goes back in time to 1999. Also here, if you want to complement the information, you can have a look also at Eurostat or the OECD, which also publish sector account statistics. The next data set is a different one because here we're talking about surveys on enterprises and households. And there are 2 surveys to mention here. The first one is the Survey on Access to Finance of Enterprises, abbreviated as SAFE. And this is giving you information on, let's say, the financial situation of enterprises. And in particular, you get ideas about which needs would they have for financing, and also how good is the access for them and the availability of financing. The second survey is the Household Financing and Consumption Survey, which is addressing households and is giving you an idea about their economic situation, their behavior, their financial situation, also what they have in terms of assets, liabilities, which income and which consumption behavior they hold. In this case, there are two nice papers that you can find on the methodology, also from the ECB's website, that explain the background of these surveys. The data is available from the website for the Household Finance Consumption Survey, or again, the Statistical Data Warehouse when it comes to the SAFE survey. The data is available from 2009 and 2010 respectively. The SAFE survey, you can find data from every 6 months, and the other one every 3 years. Regarding the data set on financial markets and interest rates, there is a lot of information that is, you could say, quite close to the heart as well to the ECB and what we're doing, because you're taking a look at what is going on at the financial markets and, for example, interest rates. So here you have information on the MFI interest rate statistics. MFI is a monetary financial institution, so you could say a bank, and you get their information about their interest rates with the different maturities, or let's say for different terms of time, and also their different breakdowns. Furthermore, there is information on securities, so financial instruments, and in particular, who is issuing these securities. So this is the security issuing statistics, or at least on an aggregated level, who is holding these securities. So who, let's say, are the investors in terms of the different sectors. And here we're again with the sectors that we have mentioned before. We also have information on the yield curves, and this is information which is available on a daily basis, even with a different maturity, again, from 3 months to 30 years. You also have information on the money markets. So let's say where banks are providing financing to each other with the short-term loans, the euro market, or even the overnight loans with the euro short-term rate, abbreviated as ESTER. Finally, also here to mention is some data on payment statistics. So really, what kind of transactions, transaction volumes, which type of payments are done, different types of infrastructure, and of course, indicators of the financial integration in the euro area. As you can expect, with all this kind of data that you have here, there is a lot of material that you can take a look at. In particular, here you have a lot of the legal acts, you have the guidelines, the regulations that define, again, on which basis the data is collected, how it is processed, and what are the kind of information that you can find here for the various different information. The data is, again, available in the Statistical Data Warehouse mainly. For the euro short-term rates, ESTER, you can also find them on the ECB website. And here as well, data availability varies a lot depending on when the different data collections have been started. And you have very different starting dates, different granularity on the time series, depending on what exactly you're looking. Interesting here might be if you want to compare it also more on an international level, you can take a look at the data provided by the Bank of International Settlements, which is also having information on debt security statistics or payments in the financial markets. The last data set that I wanted to describe and give you an introduction today are the so-called supervisory data and prudential statistics. And this has to do with the task that the ECB has picked up to also take care of banking supervision together with the national competent authorities. And here you can find supervisory data. So this is including aggregated information on, let's say, the balance sheets of the supervised institutions, the banks. And certain information is even published for individual banks, for example, on the solvency, leverage ratios, or the assets that they're holding. You can also find consolidated banking data containing information about profitability, again, balance sheet, asset qualities, liquidity of the banks in the European Union. And in this case, there is also a light long time series going back that you could take a look at to get information about this. The third item here, the macroprudential statistics. So these are, let's say, indicators that give you an idea on potential risks or threats to the financial system on a European level, and indicators that could help you or other users of this data to actually see where a risk might be or how the situation is. If you want to get some more background on this kind of information, there is for sure the supervisory data website that is worth to take a look at. When it comes to the consolidated banking data or the macroprudential statistics, again, the ECB website is a very good source for further information, and the data, you can find it on the statistical data warehouse again. Data availability is a bit younger because this is a task that has been picked up more recently, with the exception of the consolidated banking data. Here, thanks to a harmonized approach, you can even go back to 2007, and the data series have been adapted to make use of data that was available before, let's say. That much is an overview of the different data sets that we're providing, and to give you really a broad overview and idea of what is the kind of data that you have. Now, if you're interested on how can I get my hands on this data, or how do you access this data, there are several options. First, of course, you can reach out for the official portal for European data. And there, if you look on the bottom right, you see the link that is called EU Institutions Dataset. If you click there, you will find among the institutions the ECB and the data that is available from the ECB on the European Data Portal. There are other options as well that I wanted to mention, and the next one is actually the one that I've used for my example from the very beginning. So you remember our plot that this graph that we have seen on comparing interest rates and loans to households, and it is coming from this Euro area statistics website. The nice thing of this website is that it contains not all the data that we have, just a selected subset, but it is nicely presented, very visual. It is also explained in layman terms. So even if you're not a specialist in central banking, you can get an idea of which data is available, how to work with it, how to interpret it, and what does it actually mean. It also provides the possibility to embed the data, statistics, and visualizations in your app or a website that you might have. So this is a very good resource to get some first ideas and inspiration of what you can make with the data. And the last thing, of course, we have to mention the flagship, as it is called, for data from the ECB, and that is the Statistical Data Warehouse. And of course, the title was a peek into the ECB's data warehouse. So this is how it actually looks like. It's a website that provides really all the data, and it is one of the primary sources for transparent and quality assured data that you can get on all the data that I have basically presented before. In fact, if you look at the left-hand side in this navigation menu, you will see several of the data sets that I've mentioned: money credit banking, financial corporations, sectoral statistics, balance of payments. All the things I have mentioned you will find in the Statistical Data Warehouse. When you're going to this website, you will have the option to select different types of data and time series, to go through them, browse them, download them, visualize them in charts. And there is also the opportunity to directly integrate this with your application because there is an API. And as a last thing to mention, as this is a very, very rich source, it really makes sense also to take a look at the help pages for users and the API documentation and manual. And with this information, this should enable you to tap into this vast source of data that we're having available. With this, thanks a lot for joining us today for this webinar and the introduction on the ECB's data. And now I'd be happy to answer some of the questions if there are.
Great, thanks so much for the presentation. I would kick it off with the first question. Which countries are actually covered by the ECB?
So here, it depends a lot on which kind of statistics you're taking a look at. And of course, you will find information on the Euro area countries, or basically all the statistics. And in lots of cases, you will also find for the other European Union countries the data. And let's say when you're thinking, for example, balance of payments, then you also have the interrelations with the rest of the world. So here you also have information on an aggregated level for other countries and some of the data there.
To work with finance data, there's a very difficult terminology sometimes. Do you have any tips how to get used to it?
Yes. So here what I would recommend is really actually to start with the other website that I have recommended, that at least if you want to start to get familiar with the data and how to interpret it, then the Euro area statistics website is specifically designed to not use a very technical language. And that can get you familiar with this kind of information. Second, Also on the statistical data warehouse, you have always definitions for the data sets. How are they defined? You have a lot of metadata. You have also the links to background information. So these are good resources on how to get familiar with it, what is it that is behind the terms, and to get the definitions for these kind of things. Maybe one additional recommendation that I would give if you're particularly interested to get ideas of how to make use of the data for particular use cases is also to look at some of the publications of the, let's say, the kind of research papers or statistics papers that are published by the ECB, because there you can get, for example, ideas and inspiration of how the colleagues have made use of the data sets that are available for particular applications and investigations. And also there, of course, it might help you to understand what is behind the data and how to make use of it.
Julia is asking, from your perspective, working in the finance sector, is there any specific area which would be particularly interesting for participants to address? Any area where you're missing solutions or any data that is overlooked?
So that is it's a very, very good question. I think that there are probably 2 or 3 directions which I would personally consider as well interesting. Number one is really how to make all this data more accessible for people, make it easier to understand. This Euro area statistics website is just one step in this direction. But if you could build something that is demonstrating the data, is making use of the data, and is explaining it also to the public and makes it usable for researchers, for the citizens that we have in Europe, I think this is something that is very, very interesting. And there, I wouldn't constrain it to any particular area of the data that we're having, because all of them have their particular interest. And if you can explain this in a better way, then this would be something that is very, very appreciated. A second aspect that I would consider interesting is the combination with other data sets. And here it is really about putting things again in context and looking at the data from different perspectives. And there are the various challenges that we have in the EU Datathon. And I would be very curious to see how could you use this information about the financial sector, about the economy, to support some of the claims that you have for your ideas. Let's say with the Green Deal, that is one of the topics that is, of course, also interesting to us, or how to digitalize the European Union for the future. And I think that these combinations of various data sets, bringing them together and putting them in context, one data set providing the background for something else, I think these are kind of challenges that are very, very interesting and where I'm really curious and looking forward to the creative solutions people might come up with.
Henrik is asking, could you perhaps give an example of the interaction between the different sectors you can find, like data sets from different sectors?
Mm-hmm. So here you could really think about in terms of how are they interacting in terms of which types of different financial instruments are there, how are they financing each other using loans, other instruments, which kind of transactions to happen between the sectors, within the sectors. Then you also have already the balance sheets or the stocks, and these are the kind of information that you would find there. And there I would really recommend also then to take a closer look at the methodological documents that I have referenced, because there you will see then really also what is the technical breakdown of the types of instruments that you're having, what are the sectors, and the sectors are also still more fine-grained than the examples that I gave. So you have really a broader distinction, for example, in particular in the financial domain, what kind of entity do you have, which kind of player in the market? What is it let's say an investment fund? Is it a pension fund, an insurance corporation, a bank? And these kind of information and how they are interacting with each other in terms of different financial instruments.
Thanks. Julia is asking, do you have any data which could be interested in the light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
So this is a very, very recent event. I think what would make really, let's say, for all these things where you have a certain time component, I think it is interesting to take a look at the time dimension and to see what makes sense. I mean, now for Russia, I wouldn't have a good example at hand, but we have seen, for example, with this very first graph that I have shown you, that you saw that there was this change in behavior of people taking loans based on the beginning of the COVID crisis. And I think that would be an interesting aspect as well, to take a look, how can you relate certain episodes in the data that we're having with real world events, and to put that in context. Beyond that, of course, let's say the focus where you're dealing with countries that are outside the European Union, that would be something to take a look at in the external statistics.
On that point, that goes also to our participants. We're not only looking for apps, we're also looking for data visualizations, data journalism, how to explore the data. So we want to see very different ways, and very different ways can lead to winning the competition. Hagar is asking, could you give an example of how the sectoral surveys like SAFE are integrated with ECB data?
So here, in general, one thing that you would see when you take a look at the statistical data warehouse is that behind all the data you have very consistent use of reference and metadata. So all the classifications of financial instruments, for example, for concepts like loans, for who are the players, and this is also now, of course, would be of relevance for the surveys. There, it is the metadata that helps a lot in the integration and connection between the different data sets. And that is really the part and parcel also of what I mentioned at the beginning, this harmonization of the different data sets, so that you really have things comparable across the different countries that we're having in the European Union, across the different statistics. So when you're talking about a specific type of a financial instrument, let's say a particular loan, then this is always represented in the same way in all the data sets that we're having. And that allows you to combine the data sets, to compare the data sets, and to make sure when you're looking at a particular piece of information, it's consistently used across the data sets.
Great. Thanks so much. And I'm also impressed by the transparency and the knowledge which you make available on your platform. I think that's really staggering, and it's really a move in the right direction for all the public organizations to make everything available, which is of course great for also for our open data portal. And with that, I would like to thank you for the presentation. Thank you for answering all of our questions. And we would like to wish you all a very nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.